Hello and welcome to another episode. I am Brian, the Unskilled Commander, and this is Possibilities, the series where I take three legendary creatures and discuss whether or not I think they're decent commanders, or if I would bother making them a commander at all for a commander deck. And if I would, how would I start to build those cards? What would be the main themes? What would be how I would go about the cards I'd try to look for, and then go from there. It's a good thought experiment in trying to figure out different commanders and how you build them. It's helped me build some new decks and find creatures I wouldn't have normally found originally. So let's take a look at these three. First up, we've got Lier, Disciple of the Drowned. I believe it's Lier, I don't know. It's a human wizard. It's a 3/4 for 5 mana. It's a little low, but spells can't be countered, so that means everybody's spells can't be countered, which is great because nobody likes this counter spell unless you're the one slinging it. So it just negates that all right off the bat. You can't do it. You got to figure out some other way to stop people. And as long as it's your turn, each instant sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. Now, because it's mono blue, you don't have too much access to like burn damage in red, or a lot of the cool stuff in the other colors, that direct damage and whatnot. But blue does have interesting flicker abilities and bounce abilities. So I might, and of course it does have counter spells, but as we know, you can't play counter spells. But it does have other stuff that can, affect the board and control things, which is what blue's all about. I think if I was going to build this, I would probably try and look at maybe making it some sort of bounce deck where most of the creatures had some sort of enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield abilities, and then play a bunch of instants and sorceries that bounce or flicker my cards, remove target creature from the game, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, because that's basically happens then. A lot of them also say until end of turn, bring it back to the battlefield. You kind of want the ones that just say remove it and bring it back, because that happens when you're casting the spell. I think it would be interesting because I've never done a flicker deck before. I want to. I'm not sure that I would make this my commander because I think I want to do blue and white for that. But again, I don't know. I have a few cards set aside that are blue, so maybe it could be just a solo blue commander. But I'm not sure what else I would do with it. And plus, 5 mana just to get a 3/4 isn't great. Again, the abilities are decent, but you're not going to really be doing too much with Lier. You're not going to be swinging with them. You're hardly going to be blocking really. So you need your other creatures to be powerhouses in some fashion, especially something that has a really good effect when it gets bounced or when it enters the battlefield, leaves the battlefield, whatever. Cast the spell, get the effect, and then if you have the mana, just recast it with flashback from the graveyard, exiling it afterwards. So now you've got 2 instances of whatever kind of bounce you had, hopefully getting 2 cool triggers, and maybe even having enough mana left over to do one more bounce spell and putting it into your graveyard so that you can use the flashback next turn. I think it has some potential. I'm just not well versed in a lot of the blue spells that can do that, and or just blue spells that do stuff other than counters. So I'm not sure exactly how much potential is there and what kind of crazy stuff you could do. And that's another thing that'd be fun, is to really take a deep dive into blue spells, instants, and sorceries across, Magic, to see if there's some sort of weird cards that people have forgotten about from older sets that do something really specific, but maybe you can build around that. So right off the bat, I wouldn't necessarily try and make this commander, but the general idea is interesting. This could be one of the 99 in a bounce deck. That could be helpful. But again, I'm not sure that I don't think I personally would build this into a commander. Next up, we've got Rem Carolus Stalwart Slayer. A human knight. It's a 2/3 with flying and haste for 3 mana, which I think right off the bat, just that is pretty solid. Flying and haste for 3 mana. It's only 2/3 instead of a 3/3, but I mean, you're immediately swinging with it in the air. So, and at worst, you're going to be casting it on turn 3. Not many people are going to have creatures out on turn 3, let alone flyers. You get 2 damage in with your commander right off the bat. A decent start. If a spell would deal damage to you or another permanent you control, prevent that damage. That's really cool because now you've negated other people's burn spells, direct damage spells, where it's like, oh, I'm gonna, deal 5 damage to your creature and blow it up. No, you're not. It's prevented. You don't have to counter it. You don't have to do anything. As long as he's on the field, it just doesn't happen. And if a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 1 instead. Not huge. It's not like doubling it or anything, but oh, okay, you're going to do 5 damage to that person's creature. Now it's 6 damage. And what that does is that incentivizes your opponents to attack each other. They may have to figure out some trickiness to get to you, but if they have any kind of direct damage spells or just damage spells to creatures or whatnot, and someone else is even remotely a threat too, they're going to go after them because now they've got a little bit of a buff on their spells. And that could help you buy enough time, because if everyone's focusing on each other decently enough, now you've got yourself some time to build up a board state, and hopefully 1 or 2 of them have already eliminated each other and you can just swoop in for the victory. With red, I would consider maybe tossing in some goad, because now on top of everything else, you're goading your opponent's creatures, you're increasing their direct damage spells on anything, and maybe even toss in some damage doublers. And on top of all of that, I wouldn't worry about the types of damage doublers. I would put those ones in that say everybody's damage is doubled, because now they're still going to be able to combat damage you, so you got to be real careful about that. But if you're goading their creatures, giving damage doubles to everybody, and making your opponent's spells that target each other do 1 more damage, which would then get doubled, you're really controlling the setup of how the game is played, and you're going to be deciding basically how damage gets to you. Not literally deciding it, but you're going to be leading people in the path where it's like, well, this big creature's goaded, it can't come at me, it's going to go over here, and oh yeah, the damage is doubled, sorry. Oh, you're going to try and blow up my creatures? You can't. Are you going to blow up that person's creatures? It does an extra damage to them, which is doubled. All that kind of stuff. And white, that would help. You could toss a bunch of good angels in so that they'd be higher mana cost, so you would have to have decent ramp in there, which of course in red and white separately and together isn't that great. So you'd need a lot of mana rocks or mana dorks perhaps, creatures that tap for mana, or things that reduce the cost of angels and or white/red spells. So your Pearl Medallion, Ruby Medallion, Urza's Incubator, those kind of things, allowing you to get your angels out, because now angels are generally high cost to get on the battlefield, but they're high power and toughness, and they have really good effects, and they're flying. And along with your commander, who's also flying, now you've got a pretty solid setup. Again, I don't know that I'm going to try and build this deck, but I think that would be a really fun way to try it. This could be a decent goad commander, aside from, I'm sure there's really great goad commanders that actually, the commander itself has some sort of goad built into it. But if you're trying to do something fun and out of the blue that people aren't going to expect, this commander with those aspects could be something that people are like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. And you're like, yeah, haha, I win. You only get that surprise once or twice, but I think it could be fun. Finally, we have Katilda Dawnheart Prime. It's a 1/1 for 2 mana with protection from werewolves. So not great because hardly anybody really plays werewolves, and you're spending 2 mana for a 1/1. But it says human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color of this creature's colors. So, and that says all creatures, not others, meaning Katilda would then be able to tap for green or white. And obviously in this deck, you're just going to have green and white creatures, so they're all going to tap for green and or white. The big thing on this is that her other ability is pay 4 and a green and a white, tap her to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now that's a lot of mana, 6 mana, and tapping her to just do this one time. However, it's green, which means you should be able to put a lot of mana ramp spells in there to just dump basic lands onto your field really fast within the first 5 turns, so that ability of 6 mana isn't that big of a deal. And I would also try and put a lot of small but useful creatures in with a couple big creatures that have trample to give you good blockers. But a lot of creatures that tap for, you wouldn't even have to worry about getting like Llanowar elves or whatever that tap for mana, because as long as Catilda's on the field, all of your creatures tap for mana. But I would definitely put in all the little guys that have Death Touch. Like I know there's a Viper or something that's a 1/1 that has Death Touch, and that's it. You know, it's like, hey, it's just a 1/1 with Death Touch, but it's still got Death Touch. So you go up against an Eldrazi, it still kills it. Get a bunch of those out. Again, now it's just like the last creature, you have white in there, so you could put angels in. I don't know that I would in this one because I would want to keep it to humans. So there is that effect, obviously. Human creatures tap for mana. So you could try and make it all humans and just have humans that have good effects, that give other creatures trample, that draw you cards, that have death touch, things like that. And I would also try and figure out ways to untap Catilda. And I know that's not easily done. I know that's definitely a thing. And white, I believe, is one of the colors that can do that relatively well. Meaning that you can try and do her ability 2, possibly even 3 times in a turn. Doubtful, because that's a lot of mana. But again, if you can just play a ton of mana ramp spells, and also a lot of big artifacts like Soul Ring, Thran Dynamo, Sisay's Ring, all the ones that tap for 2 or more mana, colorless mana, get them out relatively early, if you're lucky enough, a bunch of creatures, you can probably get her ability done twice as long as you can find a way to untap her. And if you can do that 2-3 turns in a row, you got yourself, your creature's now +6/+6. Then finally, have a bunch of enchantments or creatures that give trample to all creatures on your side of the field. You've got yourself pretty big board state that's a pretty big threat, all off of a little 2/2 drop commander. And again, as I've said in prior videos, the lower the commander cost, the better, because, and being a 2, as long as you don't take a really bad hand, opening hand that has like nothing but plains and that's it. You want to definitely mulligan until you have one of each color. You're casting her on turn 2. Turn 2, you get to start going. And with, Rem Carlos, he's on turn 3. Those are really good. Versus Lear, who is turn 5. At worst, at best, maybe turn 3 or 4. It helps a lot to have your commander out early and start doing what your commander does. So there you go. I think out of the 3 of them, Catilda is actually the one I might lean toward the most as possibility, but I have a lot of decks that do combat damage with just a bunch of creatures and or trample, so it would just be one more in the batch of things I've already done, whereas Rem Carlos would be a little bit different because it'd be something, like I said, maybe tie that into Goat or something that I don't normally do, which would be a fun experiment and try and build my skill levels that way. So what do you think? Would you bother making any of these into commanders? Have you done them before? What did you put in them? What kind of cards would you suggest? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.